Ancient empires faced a single, relentless problem. They needed to move water across impossible distances. This was not just about engineering, it was the foundation of power itself. Without water, great cities in deserts would vanish, armies would falter, and control over vast territories would slip away. How did civilizations like Rome, Persia, and the Inca achieve hydraulic feats that seemed to defy their own technology, carrying life-giving water over mountains and through arid plains? By the end of this exploration, you will understand the universal principles that let ancient engineers master their landscapes, turning scarcity into abundance. We will uncover how they surveyed routes without modern tools and what hidden workforce made these stone rivers flow. What does it truly take for an empire to bend nature to its will? Water was the empire's lifeblood, and its movement became the ultimate test of power. For a village, a well or a nearby stream was sufficient, a simple relationship with the local landscape. But an empire does not think in villages. It thinks in capitals of 100,000 souls, in armies that march for months, in provinces that must produce grain not for themselves, but for the heart of the realm. This created a hydraulic imperative, a non-negotiable demand that shaped every decision. A growing capital like Rome or Persepolis could not rely on the Tiber River or a few mountain springs alone. The population density created an unquenchable thirst for drinking, for cooking, for the countless workshops of a metropolis. More critically, to hold conquered territories, you had to make them valuable. This meant transforming arid, newly acquired lands into fertile breadbaskets through irrigation, binding them economically to the center. And back in the city, water was not merely a private utility. It was a public spectacle and a tool of control. Magnificent fountains displayed imperial generosity, vast public baths promoted cleanliness and social cohesion, and sophisticated sewers carried away waste, preventing illness and the unrest that followed it. The empire offered its people not just security, but a civilized, healthier life, and flowing water was the most visible symbol of that bargain. So the obstacle was stark and geographical. The water source and the human need were often separated by miles of hard stone, deep valleys, and unforgiving desert. The imperative was absolute. The solution would have to be ingenious. To move a river across a landscape, you first must understand the single, silent force that makes it possible. That force is gravity. Every ancient water system, from the deserts of Persia to the peaks of the Andes, was built upon one non-negotiable rule. The water channel must maintain a consistent, gentle downhill slope from its source all the way to its destination. This sounds simple in theory, but it is a breathtakingly difficult demand in practice. It means that over a distance of 50 miles, the channel might only be allowed to drop a total of 100 feet. That is a slope so slight you would barely perceive it walking the route, less than a single foot of drop for every 2,600 feet traveled. Achieving this perfect grade was the surveyor's paramount task, and they did it with tools of elegant simplicity. The Roman engineers used an instrument called a chorobates, a long, leveled wooden frame with plumb lines and a central water trough. By sighting along its top, they could establish a true horizontal line across great distances. They worked in teams, leapfrogging this baseline across valleys and hills, slowly mapping an invisible path where water would willingly flow without ever pooling or rushing too fast. It was an exercise in profound patience and a deep, intimate reading of the land itself. We often picture aqueducts as those soaring stone arcades, but those iconic arches were only used when the chosen contour line met an impassable valley. For most of their length, Roman aqueducts were simple, covered channels cut into hillsides, tunneling through rock, or resting on low walls, faithfully following that calculated downhill ribbon. This same principle of gravity flow was mastered by the Inca on a vertical scale that seems impossible. On the steep slopes of Machu Picchu, they built stone channels that descend from mountain springs, using precisely calculated angles to guide water to ceremonial fountains and terraces. The water's own weight provided the pressure, a timeless engine that required no fuel, only flawless geometry. Gravity was the prime mover, the invisible hand that guided every decision. But laying out that perfect path was only the beginning. The real challenge was building it. Gravity's silent command found its ultimate expression in a single, sprawling network of stone and water. The Roman aqueduct stands as the archetypal system, a masterclass in integrated design that turned a principle into an empire's pulse. It began not with grandeur, but with discretion, at a carefully selected spring or a diverted river intake far from the city. The engineers sought the purest source at the highest feasible elevation, for every extra foot of height at the start meant more gravitational energy to carry the water home. From this humble beginning, the water entered the workhorse of the system, the subterranean channel. Contrary to popular imagery, the majority of an aqueduct's length, sometimes over 90%, was a simple covered trench cut into a hillside or a tunnel drilled through bedrock. This protected the water from evaporation, contamination, and sabotage, a practical solution that followed the land's contour with relentless patience. It was only when this calculated path met a deep valley that the iconic arcades rose. Those soaring stone bridges were not statements of vanity, but necessary elevators, lifting the channel back to its precise original elevation on the far side to maintain the crucial downhill slope. They were the system's most vulnerable and expensive points, built only where absolutely essential. After its long journey, the water finally arrived at the city's edge, flowing into a critical and often overlooked chamber, the distribution tank or castellum divisorium. This was the system's beating heart. Here, the single channel fed into multiple lead or ceramic pipes, each sized to supply a different district, a public bath, or an imperial fountain. The tank allowed for regulation, maintenance, and a fair, measured distribution of the city's most precious resource. The genius of the Roman system lay not just in its engineering, but in its endurance. It was built for constant, uninterrupted flow, with settling tanks to remove sediment and access shafts for cleaning. More importantly, it was backed by a formidable legal and administrative framework. An entire bureaucracy, led by a curator of the waters, managed maintenance crews, enforced laws against tampering or unauthorized taps, and allocated supply. This combination of hydraulic precision and civic organization established Rome as the undeniable benchmark, proving that moving water was as much about governance as it was about gravity. Before a single stone could be laid, the engineers faced their most abstract challenge. They had to draw an invisible line across the landscape, a path that water would willingly follow for dozens of miles. This was the realm of the surveyor, a master of geometry and patience whose tools were deceptively simple. The primary instrument was the groma, a cross of wooden arms suspended from a pole with plumb bobs hanging from each end. By sighting along the aligned strings, a surveyor could establish perfectly straight lines and right angles across great distances, plotting the aqueduct's course. For the critical task of measuring elevation, they employed the chorobates, a leveling table we mentioned, or the more sophisticated dioptra. The dioptra was essentially a sighting tube mounted on a circular plate, capable of measuring both horizontal and vertical angles with remarkable precision. With these tools, teams would begin their meticulous work from the water source, marking a series of stakes or cairns that defined the required downhill slope. Achieving the necessary gradient, often as shallow as 1 foot of drop per mile, was a feat of staggering concentration. A single misaligned stake over a long stretch could mean water pooling uselessly or flowing with destructive force. They worked in increments, leapfrogging their instruments across the terrain, constantly checking and rechecking their calculations against the immutable pull of gravity. Once the ideal route was plotted, the path itself was physically etched into the earth. Laborers would dig a shallow pilot trench along the entire surveyed line, and alongside it, they would build long mounds of stone or earth. These markers served a dual purpose. For the engineers, they were a permanent, visible guide for the construction teams that would follow. For the empire, they were a statement of intent, a ghostly preview of the stone river to come, snaking across hills and valleys before a single arch was raised. This phase reveals the true foundation of these projects. It was not brute force, but a profound collaboration between precise mathematics and an intimate, boots-on-the-ground understanding of the land. The surveyor's line was a promise written in stakes and stone that the empire would keep. While Rome mastered the art of bringing water down from mountains, another civilization confronted an even drier reality. In the vast, scorching plateaus of ancient Persia, there were no distant alpine rivers to divert. Here, water did not flow across the land, it slept beneath it, locked in secret reservoirs deep underground. The Persian solution was not to bridge valleys, but to become miners of the earth itself, inventing a technology of astonishing endurance called the qanat. This was a different kind of genius born from absolute scarcity. It began with locating a life-giving aquifer, often at the foothills of a mountain range where water from rare rains had seeped into the ground over centuries. At this highest point, diggers would sink a deep vertical shaft, the mother well, until they struck the hidden water table. This was the source, but instead of lifting the water out with buckets, they made a radical decision. They would let gravity bring the water to them by digging a gently sloping tunnel all the way back to the surface at a lower elevation, miles away. Starting from the intended outlet point in the valley, teams of specialized diggers, known as muqanis, would begin carving backward toward the mother well. They worked in pitch darkness by the light of oil lamps, using hand tools to chip through rock and soil. Every 100 feet or so, they would dig another vertical shaft straight up to the surface. These shafts served a triple purpose. They provided crucial ventilation for the workers far below. They were used to remove excavated material, and once the system was complete, they became permanent access points for maintenance and cleaning. The geometry was everything. The underground tunnel had to maintain that same perfect, consistent downhill slope as a Roman aqueduct, but here it was calculated blindly through the earth. If the slope was too steep, the water would rush and erode the tunnel walls. If it was too shallow, the flow would stagnate. The muqanis used simple plumb lines and water levels to guide them, their skill passed down through generations. When the tunnel finally broke through to the mother well, gravity took over. Water from the aquifer would begin seeping into the tunnel and flowing silently along its length, emerging miles away as a cool, steady spring in the middle of a barren plain. This was the qanat's magic. By traveling entirely underground, the precious water was shielded from the relentless desert sun, losing almost nothing to evaporation. What emerged was not just a water source, it was the genesis of an oasis, a sudden burst of green life that could support a village, irrigate fields of wheat and fruit trees, and sustain a community for centuries. Building a qanat was not a project for a single ruler's reign. It was a communal covenant with the future. A single system could take decades, even generations, to complete, requiring the coordinated labor and shared knowledge of an entire community. This was technology as a slow, patient dialogue with the desert, a whispered agreement to coax life from the deep earth and build a civilization on the promise of a hidden stream. But the Andes Mountains presented a challenge that defied both Roman valleys and Persian deserts. Here, the empire was not built across a landscape, but directly upon it, a vertical world where water did not need to be brought from afar, but tamed as it fell from the sky and rushed down impossibly steep slopes. The Inca response was not a single monumental aqueduct, but a capillary network of stone, an entire hydraulic system woven into the fabric of the mountains themselves. They began at the source, capturing the pure, cold water from high-altitude springs. These were not left to run wild. Inca engineers built meticulously crafted stone canals, often lined with precisely fitted stones and sealed with clay, to immediately guide the spring's output. The genius was in the gradient. On slopes that would send water cascading in a destructive torrent, they calculated angles that created a steady, manageable flow, sometimes so gentle the water seemed to glide rather than rush. This controlled descent was the first act of reverence, a way of honoring the water's power by directing it with purpose. Along these stone arteries, they integrated sophisticated features that speak to a deep, practical wisdom. Small filtration basins filled with gravel and sand would purify the water before it reached populated areas. At key junctions, they constructed splitter canals, intricate stone dividers that portioned the flow with mathematical fairness to different neighborhoods or agricultural zones, ensuring no single group could monopolize the life-giving resource. This was hydraulic equity carved in rock. The ultimate expression of this philosophy, however, was the integration of water with the very structure of Incan life. The water channels did not exist in isolation. They were deliberately routed to feed the famous agricultural terraces, the Andeans. Each level of these stepped fields was edged with a small canal, allowing farmers to flood or drain their plots with precision, creating microclimates that could grow everything from potatoes to maize. The water then continued its journey, often channeled through the heart of ceremonial centers. At a site like Machu Picchu, 16 consecutively linked fountains cascade through the ceremonial district, each basin fed by the one above, blending utility with spiritual significance. The water's journey from mountaintop spring to temple fountain to terrace field was a single, unbroken ritual. This was a holistic, landscape-scale hydrology. The Inca did not just move water, they choreographed its entire relationship with their world, from the moment it emerged from the earth to its final task of nourishing a crop. Their empire was not sustained in spite of the mountains, but because of them, by listening to the water's path and building a stone conversation in reply. While the Inca choreographed mountain springs, another desert civilization faced a scarcity so absolute it demanded a different kind of genius. For the Nabateans of Petra, there were no hidden aquifers to tunnel toward, no distant rivers to divert. Their world was one of sheer, waterless rock, punctuated by brief, violent bursts of nature's fury. Their strategy was not about conveyance over distance, but about capturing time itself, turning the desert's rare moments of chaos into a sustained, life-giving reserve. At the heart of this system was a profound understanding of the flash flood. Seasonal rains in the surrounding highlands would gather into torrents that roared through the narrow canyons or sikhs leading to Petra. Instead of fearing these destructive surges, the Nabateans saw them as their only possible source. They became masters of the intercept, building a network of low stone dams and diversion walls high in the wadis, the dry riverbeds. These structures did not aim to hold back the entire flood, but to skillfully peel off a portion of its force at the very moment of peak flow. The diverted water was then funneled into a meticulously carved labyrinth of channels. They cut these channels directly into the cliff faces along the Sikh, a permanent stone gutter system that guided the captured floodwater down into the heart of the city. This was water harvesting on a monumental scale, but capturing the water was only half the battle, the other half was holding onto it. Petra's landscape became a honeycomb of storage. The Nabateans carved vast, bell-shaped cisterns directly into the solid rock, some large enough to hold thousands of gallons. Every courtyard, temple complex, and wealthy home likely had its own underground reservoir, lined with waterproof plaster to prevent seepage. This created a distributed, resilient network of water security. The philosophy was one of radical concentration. They gathered every possible drop from a vast catchment area across the surrounding plateaus, channeling it all inward to a single fortified point. The water was then managed with astonishing precision through a system of ceramic pipes, stone conduits, and controlled sluice gates, allowing it to be allocated to public fountains, royal baths, and irrigation for hidden garden plots. This wasn't just engineering, it was a complete societal adaptation. The very location of Petra in a fortified canyon basin was a hydraulic decision. It made them the inevitable destination for every drop of water in the region. Their wealth, built on the incense trade, was protected not just by cliffs, but by the certainty of water in a waterless world. They survived not by moving water across impossible distances, but by making the impossible distance come to them in a controlled, life-saving torrent, and then refusing to let it go. The stone arteries of these empires were only as strong as the materials that lined them. To move water for generations, engineers had to solve a relentless puzzle of leakage, pressure, and decay. Their solutions, crafted from the earth itself, reveal a global material science adapted to local genius. The Romans, masters of volume and distance, developed a layered approach. For the main aqueduct channels, they relied on a revolutionary waterproof concrete known as opus signinum. This was a mix of crushed pottery, tile, and brick fragments bound with lime mortar, creating an incredibly dense hydraulic seal that actually grew stronger when continuously wet. It was the workhorse lining that made those miles of subterranean channel possible. But when water needed to be distributed under pressure within a city, to feed a multi-story bathhouse or a towering fountain, they turned to a more controversial material, lead. Lead pipes or fistulae were cast in standardized sizes and joined with molten solder, creating a flexible, durable network that could handle sharp turns and varying water pressure. The Romans were aware of lead's potential health risks, with some writers noting its effects, yet the material's utility in creating a pressurized urban grid often outweighed these concerns in their calculus. Their systems were designed for the long term, featuring regular access shafts and settling tanks where mineral deposits, called sinter, could be manually chipped away by maintenance crews, a never-ending battle against the water's own chemistry. On the other side of the world, the Inca solved the same problems with a different philosophy, one of perfect fit rather than impervious seal. Their canals were masterpieces of dry stone masonry, each rock painstakingly shaped and fitted against its neighbor so tightly that a knife blade could not slip between them. This precision minimized leakage through sheer geometric perfection. For longer runs or to cross unstable ground, they used durable ceramic pipes, often interlocking like sections of bamboo, which were then buried for protection and temperature stability. The Inca approach to maintenance was built into the design. Their channels were often easily accessible, following terraces and pathways, and the constant, gentle flow from mountain springs carried less sediment, reducing the sinter buildup that plagued slower Roman systems. This contrast in materials tells a deeper story. Roman technology was often additive and sealing, using manufactured compounds to create a barrier between water and earth. Inca technology was subtractive and integrative, shaping the stone itself into a harmonious conduit that became part of the mountain's fabric. Elsewhere, from Mesopotamia to China, the humble ceramic pipe was the universal tool. Baked clay was cheap, resistant to corrosion, and could be mass-produced in standardized shapes. These pipes, sometimes glazed for a smoother interior, formed the capillary networks of countless cities, proving that sometimes the most enduring solution was also the simplest one fired in a kiln. The true test of any system, however, came not in its first glorious flow, but in the silent, decades-long struggle to keep it open. The true cost of these stone rivers was not measured in stone, but in human lives and lifetimes. Every aqueduct, qanat, and canal was ultimately a human pyramid, a staggering mobilization of labor that only an empire could command. The brute force of excavation, the moving of millions of tons of earth and rock, fell to the most abundant and expendable resource, the laboring masses. In Rome, this meant a workforce of enslaved people, prisoners of war, and soldiers on peacetime duty. Legions, famous for building roads and forts, were also deployed to dig the trenches and quarry the stone for aqueducts, their military discipline repurposed for civic engineering. In Persia and other ancient kingdoms, a system known as corvée labor was common, where subjects owed a certain number of days of work per year to the state as a form of tax. This was not a voluntary workforce but one compelled by imperial decree, a direct translation of political power into physical effort. They moved in vast, coordinated teams, digging the pilot trenches, hauling baskets of rubble, and preparing the ground for the specialists who would follow. Their work was anonymous, backbreaking, and often dangerous, the unrecorded foundation upon which all else was built. Yet above this foundational layer existed a tier of highly skilled artisans, the true engineers of the ancient world. In Rome, the aquarii were not just plumbers, but a respected class of hydraulic architects and overseers. They were the ones who interpreted the surveyor's stakes, supervised the precise laying of the channel's gradient, and solved the daily problems of construction. They understood the properties of mortar and concrete, the stresses on an arch, and the mathematics of water flow. Alongside them worked the master stonemasons, who could shape the giant blocks of an arcade with such precision that they fit without mortar, and the tunnelers, who worked from opposite ends of a mountain to meet in the middle with astonishing accuracy. In Persia, the muqannis who dug the qanats possessed a sacred, generational knowledge. They could judge soil types by smell and touch, understand where an aquifer might be found, and maintain the critical slope in utter darkness. Their skills passed from father to son. This division of labor was the empire's secret engine. The state provided the scale, the sheer numbers of hands, while the specialized guilds and families provided the irreplaceable knowledge. An empire could command 100,000 men to dig a trench, but only a master with a dioptra could ensure that trench would actually carry water 50 miles to a city's gates. The ability to feed, house, and organize this multi-layered workforce for years, even decades, was perhaps the ultimate imperial achievement. It demonstrated a logistical control so complete that it could redirect the flow of human effort as easily as it redirected a river, bending both toward a single, monumental purpose. The legacy of these systems, therefore, is twofold: the enduring stone and the vanished human symphony that made it sing. Yet the silent, steady flow of water through these channels was governed by a hidden mathematics. Ancient engineers, without the formal laws of fluid dynamics, developed an empirical science of flow, a practical wisdom born from observation and relentless trial. They understood the core relationship between a channel's slope, its cross-sectional area, and the resulting speed and volume of water. In Rome, this practical knowledge was codified into a standard unit of measurement called the quinaria, named after the small-bore lead pipe it originally represented. The quinaria was not a precise volumetric measure by modern standards, but a functional benchmark for capacity. Engineers and administrators used it to calculate the total water supply entering the city and to allocate rights to private users, estates, and public buildings. It was a system of hydraulic accounting, ensuring the empire's most vital resource was distributed according to a clear, if approximate, ledger. Managing this flow, however, presented a dramatic challenge whenever the aqueduct's carefully surveyed path met a deep, wide valley. Building a soaring arcade was sometimes too costly or impractical. For these moments, Roman engineers deployed one of their most audacious innovations, the inverted siphon. Here, the open channel would end at a sealed tank on one hillside. From this tank, water would plunge down into a bundle of heavy-duty lead pipes laid across the valley floor, only to be forced back up the opposite slope to a receiving tank at a slightly lower elevation. The principle relied on water's incompressibility and weight. The momentum and pressure generated by the long downhill run pushed the water up the other side, as long as the outlet was lower than the inlet. It was a breathtaking gamble with physics, requiring immensely strong pipes to withstand the tremendous pressure, and meticulous calculation to ensure the water had enough force to complete the climb without bursting the seals. The archaeological record reveals they did not always get it right on the first attempt. We find evidence of constant refinement, sediment traps built into channels to catch debris before it could clog a siphon's narrow pipes, and bypass channels that could divert flow during maintenance or repairs. At the ends of aqueducts, settling tanks show thick layers of mineral deposit, proof of the endless battle to keep the water clear. Their understanding had limits, of course. They could not precisely calculate friction loss in a pipe or predict turbulent flow. Their knowledge was a living library of what worked, built project by project, failure by adjustment, over centuries. This empirical engineering was a dialogue with the water itself, a slow, collective learning written in stone, lead, and the persistent flow that outlasted the empires that commanded it. The proof of this entire hydraulic concept arrived not with a grand arcade, but with a tunnel. In the year 312 before the Common Era, decades before Rome would even fight its first war with Carthage, a censor named Appius Claudius Caecus made a monumental decision. He would not wait for a crisis. He would build the city's first aqueduct, the Aqua Appia, as a deliberate act of creation. This was not a reaction to drought, but a declaration of what Rome could become. The engineering choices were pragmatic and revealing. For almost its entire 11-mile length, the Aqua Appia ran underground, a hidden stream carved through the volcanic tufa rock of the Roman countryside. This was a sensible, defensive strategy. An underground channel was protected from enemies, from contamination, and from the elements. It followed the simplest, most direct path from its source, springs located just east of the city, and it maintained that crucial, gentle slope entirely out of sight. Its capacity was modest, delivering what historians estimate to be a fraction of the water later systems would bring, enough for a growing city, but not yet for the spectacular displays of imperial power. Yet its significance was immense. The project was a staggering logistical exercise, proving Rome could organize labor, secure a right-of-way, and execute a multi-year public works project of unprecedented scale. For Appius Claudius, it was a masterstroke of political theater. By financing it with state funds and attaching his name to it forever, he tied his legacy directly to the lifeblood of the city. He gave the people of Rome something they had never had before, a guaranteed, clean public water supply that flowed regardless of the season. The Aqua Appia was the prototype, the foundational experiment that answered the most critical question: could it be done? Its successful completion and its operation for centuries thereafter provided the empirical blueprint. It proved the surveyor's methods worked on a real landscape. It proved that a workforce could be sustained for such a task. Most importantly, it proved that water could be made to obey the will of the state, to flow from a chosen point to a chosen destination. This first humble underground channel was the seed. It demonstrated the concept so convincingly that it unleashed a wave of ambition, setting a precedent that would lead, over the next 5 centuries, to the vast, soaring networks that defined Roman power. The empire learned to walk with the Aqua Appia so that later it could run. Rising from a river gorge in southern France stands a testament to that ambition, the Pont du Gard. This is not merely a bridge, it is the aqueduct's most dramatic and enduring punctuation mark, a 3-tiered arcade of golden limestone that carries a water channel 160 feet above the Garden River. Its form follows a perfect, brutal logic. The lowest tier, with 6 massive arches, was built to withstand the river's fiercest floods. The middle tier, with 11 slightly narrower arches, provides the essential elevation. And the top tier, with 35 smaller arches, finally carries the covered water channel itself, wide enough for a person to walk through for maintenance. Each stone, some weighing over 6 tons, was precisely cut and fitted using the dry stone technique, locked together by gravity and geometry without a speck of mortar. This was construction as a colossal 3-dimensional puzzle, assembled by crews who likely used wooden cranes and earthen ramps, their engineering as invisible as the water flow the bridge was designed to support. The Pont du Gard was the critical link in a 31-mile system that brought water from the springs of Uzes to the bustling provincial city of Nims. Its gradient is a marvel of restraint, dropping only 1 inch for every 330 feet of length across its entire upper span. This near-perfect flatness was the entire reason for its existence, because the chosen water source lay at an elevation only 56 feet higher than the city's distribution tank. To maintain that precious, gentle slope all the way from the mountains, the channel had to cross the gorge at this exact height, and no other path would do. This reveals the true cost of the arcade. Building such a monument consumed staggering resources in labor, materials, and time. Roman engineers used them only when the landscape offered no cheaper alternative, when a tunnel would be too long or a detour would ruin the water's vital slope. Thus, every soaring aqueduct bridge was a symbol of uncompromising intent. It declared that the empire's logic, its need for water and control, would not be bent or diverted by mere geography. The Pont du Gard was a statement written in stone that when nature presented an impossible gap, Rome would build an impossible bridge and make the water obey. Yet for all its monumental might, the Pont du Gard served a provincial city. The ultimate proving ground for Roman hydraulic ambition lay closer to home, in the very heart of the empire, where the terrain presented a different kind of puzzle. Rome itself was not built on a flat plain, but sprawled across 7 distinct hills. Supplying the bustling valleys with public fountains and baths was one thing, but how do you bring the lifeblood of civilization to the elevated neighborhoods, the palaces and temples perched atop the Capitoline or Esquiline? The answer arrived in a thunder of stone and water, the Aqua Claudia. Initiated by the Emperor Caligula and completed under Claudius, this was one of Rome's grandest and most complex aqueducts, a system built not just for volume but for strategic elevation. Its source lay far to the east, in the cool, abundant springs of the Anio Valley, over 40 miles away. The quality of this water was renowned, but the distance and the required grade made the project a decades-long gamble. The Claudia's route was a masterful hybrid. For long stretches, it ran as a buried channel, cutting through hills in dark, cool tunnels. But when it approached the city, the engineers made a dramatic choice. They brought it into Rome on a series of towering, stacked arcades, some sections reaching over 100 feet high, marching across the Roman countryside like a stone colonnade for water. These famous arches, whose ruins still stand today, were not merely for show. They were topographic elevators. By carrying the channel at such a great height as it entered the city, the Aqua Claudia could finally serve the hills. From its terminal castellum on the Esquiline Hill, the highest of Rome's 7, the water could now flow downward under its own pressure to supply the entire eastern side of the city, including the imperial palaces. This was hydraulic tailoring on an imperial scale. The Claudia did not just bring water to Rome, it brought it to the right parts of Rome, solving the specific puzzle of an urban landscape built on high ground. Its construction was famously troubled, plagued by collapses and repairs even in antiquity, a testament to the staggering difficulty of the undertaking. Yet its very existence showcased a new level of confidence. The empire was no longer just satisfying basic needs. It was engineering geographic equity. ensuring that the symbolic and political centers of power on the hills could partake in the same aquatic luxury as the neighborhoods below. The Aqua Claudia was a statement that no part of the city, no matter how lofty, would be left thirsty. Deep in the arid heart of Iran, a hidden river has been flowing for nearly 3,000 years. This is the Qanat of Gonabad, a Persian marvel that transforms the very definition of sustainability. While many ancient works are ruins, this water system is not a relic. It is a living, breathing lifeline that still quenches the thirst of a modern town. Its statistics are staggering. The mother well plunges more than 150 feet straight down into the earth, tapping into a fossil aquifer, an ancient sea of water trapped in rock since a wetter age. From there, a gently sloping tunnel stretches for over 25 miles, a dark, cool highway carved entirely by hand through rock and soil. To build and maintain this subterranean channel, ancient diggers created more than 400 vertical shafts, each one a portal to the world below, used for ventilation during construction and as permanent access points for cleaning. This was not a project of a single ruler but of generations, a testament to a community's unwavering commitment to its own survival. The water that emerges is cool, clear, and constant, a miraculous spring in the desert that has never run dry. But the true genius of Gonabad lies not just in its engineering, but in its governance. For a system this vast and vital to function for millennia, it required a flawless social contract. The water was divided into precise, traditional shares known as sang. These were not measured by volume, but by time. A landowner's share might be the right to direct the entire flow of the Qanat to his fields for a specific period, say 1 full day every 2 weeks. This created a rotating schedule, a communal clockwork where every participant knew exactly when their turn would come. The system was managed by a trusted local official, a water master who ensured the schedule was followed and who oversaw the essential, ongoing maintenance. Every year, teams would descend the shafts to clear silt and repair tunnel walls, funded by contributions from all the shareholders. This shared responsibility made the Qanat's preservation a matter of direct self-interest for the entire community. The Qanat of Gonabad demonstrates that the most resilient technology is one that is woven into the social and economic fabric of life itself. It was not a gift from a distant emperor, but a covenant between neighbors across time, a promise to the future written in water and stone. High in the Andes, another water temple stands as a testament to controlled power. The Inca site of Tipón, near Cusco, is not a fortress or a palace in the traditional sense. It is a sprawling, open-air laboratory of hydraulics, a masterpiece where water was not merely channeled but choreographed. Here, on a steep mountainside, Inca engineers created a system of breathtaking complexity and beauty, turning a natural slope into a living diagram of their water wisdom. The system begins not with one source but with several. A network of stone-lined canals captures water from multiple springs on the upper slopes, converging and diverging like the branches of a silver tree. These canals are feats of precision, their gradients calculated to maintain a steady, gentle flow even down precipitous inclines. The water is then guided through a series of 13 graceful, terraced agricultural plots, each one a leveled platform held back by immaculate stone walls. But this is more than a farm. Each terrace is an independent hydraulic unit. Small, meticulously carved stone channels run along the upper edges of each terrace wall, allowing water to be directed onto the soil with the simple placement of a stone slab to divert the flow. Farmers could flood a single plot for irrigation or drain it completely, creating perfect conditions for different crops in a cascade of microclimates. The true spectacle, however, lies in the ceremonial heart of the site. Here, the engineers created a dramatic display of pure hydraulic artistry. A wide, central canal delivers water to a beautiful trapezoidal fountain. The water spills from this fountain into a shallow, polished stone basin, then cascades down a carved stone staircase, creating a series of tiny, glittering waterfalls before being collected and redirected to the terraces below. This is engineering with a sense of theater. The sound, the sight, the movement of the water was undoubtedly part of the experience, blending utility with spiritual reverence for the life-giving element. Archaeologists believe Tipón may have been a royal estate, a private garden and retreat for the Inca nobility. This context makes its sophistication even more profound. It could have been a place where master engineers experimented with flow rates, channel designs, and distribution methods in a controlled, sacred environment. They could test how water behaved on different slopes, how to split a stream evenly, or how to create pleasing aesthetic effects, all within the walls of an imperial garden. The lessons learned here in this stone playground of water would then be applied across the empire, from the terraces of Machu Picchu to the farmlands of the Sacred Valley. Tipón represents the Inca philosophy in its purest form, a seamless fusion of the practical and the sublime, where feeding a civilization and honoring the gods were two purposes served by the same perfectly guided stream. Long before Rome laid its first stone aqueduct, another city mastered the art of water. Mohenjo-Daro, a metropolis of the ancient Indus Valley civilization, thrived over 4,000 years ago in what is now Pakistan. Its greatest architectural wonder was not a temple or a palace, but a pool. The Great Bath was a monumental public tank, built with a precision that reveals a society already thinking like an empire. The structure was a rectangular basin, sunk into the ground and lined with 2 layers of meticulously baked bricks. Between these bricks, the builders applied a thick layer of bitumen, a natural tar, creating a waterproof seal so effective that it likely held water for centuries. This was not a simple reservoir, it was a carefully engineered vessel fed by water from a large well in an adjacent room, ensuring a fresh, controllable supply. But the true sophistication lay in what happened after the water was used. The entire complex was built with an integrated drainage system. A large corbelled drain, also lined with bitumen, ran from one corner of the bath, carrying away used water to a separate, brick-lined cesspit outside the building. This separation of clean supply and waste removal is a foundational principle of urban sanitation, and here it was in practice 2 millennia before the Cloaca Maxima of Rome. The Great Bath was the centerpiece of a much wider hydraulic network. The entire city of Mohenjo-Daro was laced with hundreds of brick wells, providing decentralized access to groundwater for its neighborhoods. A grid of covered drains ran along the main streets, collecting wastewater from homes and directing it safely out of the living areas. This was not a piecemeal effort, it was a unified civic plan. The construction and maintenance of such a system required centralized authority, collective labor, and a shared understanding of public health. The Great Bath itself, likely used for ritual purification, stood as a powerful symbol of this communal investment. It demonstrates that the core ideas of moving and managing water on an urban scale, the concepts of supply, containment, and drainage, did not begin with the classical empires of the Mediterranean. They were born in the baked brick cities of the Indus, where a civilization we still struggle to fully understand had already solved the essential equation for urban life, marrying water with the will of a well-ordered society. A finished aqueduct was not a completed work, but a promise that now had to be kept every single day. The silent, steady flow of water from a distant spring to a city fountain was a fragile miracle, perpetually threatened by the very earth it traversed. Mineral deposits called sinter would slowly crust the channel walls, narrowing the passage like hardened arteries. Earthquakes could shift stone alignments by a fraction of an inch, breaking the perfect grade. Landslides could bury sections, and tree roots could probe through joints, seeking the moisture within. Against this relentless decay stood an army of the unseen, the maintenance crews. In Rome, these were the aquarii, state-employed teams who patrolled the channels. They would descend through the regular access shafts, their oil lamps casting flickering light on the stone conduits, to chip away the sinter buildup with hammers and chisels. It was hot, claustrophobic, and endless work, a battle against geology itself to preserve the water's path. This physical upkeep was governed by an even more intricate system of rules and administration. The Roman state appointed a high-ranking official, the curator aquarum, who commanded not just laborers but a full legal and financial authority over the water. His role was to ensure the empire's lifeblood was allocated fairly and protected absolutely. Detailed legal codes, some dating back to the time of Augustus, spelled out severe penalties for tampering with an aqueduct. Diverting water for a private farm without authorization, damaging the channel walls, or even planting trees too close to the structure were all punishable offenses. The law recognized that a single person's interference could jeopardize the health and stability of an entire city district. This legal framework turned a public utility into a sacred trust, defended by the full force of the state. Funding this perpetual care required a dedicated treasury. The Roman system was financed through state funds, special taxes, and sometimes the private wealth of emperors seeking legacy. This money paid for the aquarii, for the quarrying of new stone to repair collapsed arches, and for the lead to recast broken pipes. It was a continuous investment, a budgetary line item that acknowledged these stone rivers were not assets but living, breathing organs of the city that demanded constant nourishment. In Persia, the social contract of the qanats served a similar purpose. The water shares, or sang, were not just rights but carried proportional responsibilities. Each shareholder contributed to a communal fund used to pay the Mukani diggers for their annual descent into the tunnels to clear silt and reinforce walls. If a shareholder neglected their payment, they could lose their water rights. This created a self-policing, sustainable economy of maintenance, where everyone's survival depended on everyone's participation. The true marvel, then, shifts from the stone to the society. The physical engineering was a monumental achievement, but it was the bureaucratic engineering, the laws, the budgets, the scheduled rotations, the dedicated core of caretakers, that allowed these systems to function not for a decade but for centuries. It represents a profound understanding that building something is only the first act. The greater test is building the institution that outlasts the builders, the invisible web of agreement and obligation that convinces generation after generation to descend into the dark, to chip away the stone, and to keep the promise flowing. But even the most brilliant engineering has a breaking point. For all their grandeur, these water systems existed in a delicate balance with forces far greater than any empire. Time, geology, and human conflict could unravel miles of stone in a moment. The relentless accumulation of mineral deposits, called sinter, was a slow, inevitable enemy. In Roman aqueducts, the constant flow of hard water left behind layers of calcium carbonate, gradually narrowing the channels until the water's whisper became a trickle. Cleaning this required crews to descend regularly, chipping away at the rock-like crust in a never-ending battle against the water's own chemistry. More dramatically, the earth itself could shift. A minor earthquake, imperceptible on the surface, could misalign a critical section of channel by a few inches, breaking the perfect gradient and causing water to pool and stagnate. In Persia, a qanat tunnel could collapse from saturated soil or seismic tremor, burying a generation's work and severing the lifeline to an oasis. These were not failures of design, but reminders that the technology was in a permanent dialogue with a living, moving planet. The greatest vulnerability, however, was often human. An aqueduct was a spectacularly exposed logistical artery. During times of conflict, a besieging army needed only to breach a single arcade or divert a source spring to cripple a city. The mere threat could force a surrender, proving that water was not just life but also leverage. Yet the most common cause of failure was not violent attack but quiet neglect. The magnificent Roman networks did not suddenly shatter when the empire fell. They faded slowly over centuries. The elaborate bureaucracy that funded the aquarii maintenance crews dissolved. The legal codes protecting the channels from encroachment lost their power. Without the centralized authority, wealth, and collective will of the imperium, the system began to consume itself. Settling tanks filled with silt that no one cleared, cracks in the mortar went unmended. Farmers, desperate for irrigation, tapped into the channels illegally, further reducing the flow for the city. The aqueducts did not vanish in a day, they became ghosts, their stone bones repurposed for bridges or castles, their original purpose forgotten by the people who walked beside them. This slow decline reveals a profound truth. These were not just feats of engineering, they were feats of sustained agreement. They required a society organized enough to build them and committed enough to maintain them across generations. The stone was strong, but the social contract was fragile. When that contract broke, the water stopped. The legacy of these systems, therefore, is dual. It celebrates human ingenuity in bending nature to a purpose, but it also whispers a caution. It shows that our greatest creations are not monuments, but relationships between people and their environment, and between a community and its future. They endure only as long as the will to care for them does. The flow of water was never just a local story. It traveled. As empires grew and trade routes stretched across continents, the most vital knowledge they carried was not always silk or spice, but the secret of making the desert bloom. Along the sprawling networks of the Silk Road, caravans moved more than luxury goods. They became conduits for an invisible cargo, hydraulic wisdom. The most profound export from Persia may well have been the qanat. This elegant solution for mining groundwater did not stay within imperial borders. As Persian influence and trade expanded, the concept migrated west into the arid landscapes of the Middle East and North Africa, and eastward along the Silk Road toward Central Asia and China. In Arabic, these systems became known as Khares, and their presence transformed regions once thought uninhabitable. The core principle was universally adaptable, a gravity-fed tunnel tapping a hidden aquifer. But the implementation was always a conversation with the local earth. In the mountains of Oman, builders faced different rock strata, adapting their tunneling techniques. In the arid expanses of Xinjiang in western China, qanat builders integrated the system with local irrigation practices, creating oasis towns that thrived for centuries. This was not a simple copy and paste of technology. It was a translation. Traders, diplomats, and perhaps enslaved engineers carried the core idea, the mental blueprint of the sloping underground channel. Then local experts, with their own deep knowledge of soils, water tables, and materials, would interpret that blueprint. They used the stone they had, they adapted the shaft spacing to their specific geology, and they governed the resulting water with their own social codes. The movement was not only east to west. The Roman concept of the aqueduct, with its precise surveying and monumental arcades, also traveled. As the Roman Empire expanded, so did its waterworks, imprinting the model on provinces from North Africa to the Middle East. Later, during the Islamic Golden Age, scholars in places like Cordoba, Spain, studied and synthesized these diverse traditions, Greek, Roman, and Persian, compiling vast engineering treatises that preserved and advanced hydraulic knowledge. They became the librarians of water, ensuring that these hard-won principles survived political collapses. This exchange reveals a fundamental truth about ancient innovation. Breakthroughs were rarely born in isolation. They were seeds carried on the wind of commerce and conquest, landing in new soil and taking root in unique forms. A trader from Samarkand might not understand the mechanics of a Roman valve, but he would immediately grasp the value of a reliable water source in a desert caravanserai. The real commodity traded on those dusty routes was not just what you could hold in your hand, but what you could hold in your mind, the power to summon life from stone and sand. This silent exchange of ideas meant that a farmer in Morocco and a farmer in Turkmenistan, though separated by a continent, might both be watering their fields using a distant echo of the same Persian genius. The networks that moved spices and silks were, in their most essential function, also networks that moved survival itself. The silent stone channels left behind by these empires are not just ruins, they are frozen testimony. To unlock their stories, modern investigators must become detectives of dust and mineral, reading the landscape for clues invisible to the untrained eye. The first step is often the most straightforward, a patient physical survey. Archaeologists walk the projected paths of aqueducts, searching for the subtle signs, a line of collapsed rubble, a faint depression in the earth, or the mouth of a long-forgotten tunnel cutting into a hillside. These surface traces map the skeleton of the system, but to find the hidden veins, the buried qanat tunnels or collapsed subterranean channels, technology provides a kind of X-ray vision. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy into the earth, and the reflected signals can reveal the distinct void of a tunnel or the compacted fill of an ancient trench, allowing researchers to map these underground rivers without ever breaking ground. Sometimes the water itself left a diary. Inside Roman aqueduct channels, thick layers of mineral deposit, that sinter we discussed, form a chemical record. By carefully extracting core samples, scientists can analyze these layers almost like tree rings. The thickness and composition of the sinter can reveal how long the aqueduct operated, the chemistry of the source water, and even periods of reduced flow or maintenance when the deposit stopped accumulating. This physical evidence is then cross-referenced with the written word when we are fortunate enough to have it. The Roman water commissioner Sextus Julius Frontinus left us an invaluable first-hand account, his work De Aqueductu on aqueducts. In it, he details the capacities, sources, and legal statutes governing Rome's water network, providing a bureaucratic blueprint against which the archaeology can be compared. His frustrations with illegal taps and his pride in the system's grandeur give us not just data, but the voice of the administrator who kept it all flowing. In Persia, while such comprehensive texts are rarer, local oral histories and land right documents detailing water shares have helped ethnographers piece together the social organization that maintained the qanats for millennia. Each method builds upon the others. The ground-penetrating radar suggests a tunnel's path, the archaeological dig confirms its construction technique, and the sinter analysis tells us for how many centuries it carried life. This multidisciplinary detective work does more than validate historical claims. It adds nuance and scale. It turns legend into measured fact, revealing not just that they built these wonders, but how they thought, how they adapted, and ultimately, what they prioritized enough to carve into the very bones of the earth. The stones are silent, but we are learning, line by line and layer by layer, how to make them speak. The principles that guided a Roman aqueduct surveyor are still written into the code of every modern city. Today's vast municipal water supplies, delivering clean water to millions of taps, still rely on that same ancient, non-negotiable rule, gravity. We may use electric pumps to supplement the system, but the foundational design is often a grand, invisible echo of the past. Reservoirs are placed high in hills or mountains, and from there, water flows through a hidden network of pipes, following a carefully calculated downhill slope to reach our homes. The core physics, the elegant reliance on water's own weight to do the work, remains unchanged from the chorobates to the computer model. It is a testament to the timelessness of that first great insight. Yet our contemporary challenges also mirror the ancient ones with startling clarity. In arid regions from the American Southwest to North Africa, the struggle to balance growing populations with finite water supplies is the modern version of the imperial hydraulic imperative. Here, the ancient Persian Qanat is experiencing a quiet revival. In places like Iran and Oman, communities are cleaning out long-neglected tunnels, recognizing their sustainable brilliance. A qanat produces no carbon emissions, loses almost no water to evaporation, and taps aquifers at a gentle, renewable rate, unlike energy-intensive deep wells that can drain them dry. This revival is not about rejecting modern technology, but about synthesizing it with ancient wisdom, using new materials to reinforce old tunnels while honoring the original gravity-fed design. These enduring systems offer a profound lesson in resilience. They teach us to work with the landscape's natural gradients, not against them. The ancient engineers did not fight the pull of gravity, they invited it to be their partner. They did not conquer a desert by overwhelming it, but by listening to its hidden rhythms and building a slow, patient conversation with the deep earth. In an era of climate uncertainty, this mindset shift may be their greatest legacy. It moves us from a philosophy of extraction and domination to one of alignment and stewardship, suggesting that the most enduring solutions are not those that force nature to obey, but those that understand how to join its flow. Even with all we have uncovered, the past guards its secrets closely. For every aqueduct we can walk beside and every qanat shaft we can still descend, there remain profound gaps in our understanding, silent spaces in the story where our evidence runs out and mystery begins. These are not failures of scholarship, but invitations, the very puzzles that drive archaeologists and engineers to look closer. Consider the Inca surveyors who carved water channels down mountain slopes with gradients rivaling modern laser levels. We can see the breathtaking results in the stone, but what specific tools did they hold in their hands to achieve such perfection? The Spanish chroniclers who arrived after the empire's fall described some instruments, but no physical examples have ever been found. Did they use simple water-filled troughs as levels, or perhaps sighting devices made of wood and cord? The precise method remains an open question, a testament to a technology so seamlessly integrated into the landscape that its tools vanished with its makers. Deep in the Persian desert, another practical mystery lingers. We know teams of Muqanis dug qanat tunnels for miles, often hundreds of feet below the surface. The vertical shafts provided air, but during the initial excavation of a new tunnel, before those shafts were dug ahead of the work, how did the first diggers breathe in the stifling, pitch-black depths? Some researchers suggest they used animal skin bellows to pump air forward from the starting shaft, a desperate and ingenious form of early ventilation. Others propose they worked in very short shifts, digging only as far as the existing air would allow before retreating. The true answer is lost to the silent, laborious moments that left no trace in the archaeological record. And then there are the recipes lost to time. Roman engineers wrote of special waterproof mortars and concretes that set underwater, formulas that gave their aqueducts and harbor walls incredible longevity. While we have reverse-engineered the general composition of pozzolanic concrete, the exact mixtures for specific, legendary mortars mentioned in texts, with their unique additives and curing processes, are gone. These were likely trade secrets passed from master to apprentice, never written down. Each of these mysteries shifts our perspective. They remind us that history is not a completed puzzle, but a continuous conversation. Every unanswered question is a frontier for current research, where experimental archaeologists might try to dig a qanat segment using only period tools, or materials scientists analyze a minute sample of ancient plaster with new technology. The gaps in our knowledge are not empty spaces, they are active spaces where curiosity continues to build upon the foundations laid by those ancient engineers, reaching into the dark, still hoping to touch the handiwork of the past. The story of moving water across impossible distances is, in the end, a story about two kinds of mastery. It was a profound partnership between understanding the physical world and organizing the human one. The core principle was universal and elegantly simple: the silent, unyielding pull of gravity. From the Roman surveyor with his chorobates to the Persian muqani in his dark tunnel, every calculation aimed at one goal: to create a path where water would willingly flow, using its own weight as the engine. This empirical grasp of physics was the first genius, but the second genius, the one that truly made the impossible possible, was social. It was the empire's ability to command, coordinate, and sustain a vast human effort over generations. An engineer could plot the perfect line, but only a state could mobilize the legions of laborers to dig it, the skilled artisans to build it, and the administrators to fund and protect it for centuries. This combination turned a scientific insight into a stone river. The aqueduct, the qanat, the terraced canal, these were not just engineering projects. They were the hidden infrastructure of civilization itself, as definitive of imperial power as a legion on the march or a road across a continent. They were the physical manifestation of a bargain, the empire's promise of order, health, and abundance, delivered in a continuous, life-giving stream. Their legacy endures not merely as ruins for us to admire, but as a testament to a specific kind of human ingenuity, one that looks at a mountain or a desert and sees not a barrier but a conversation. It reminds us to look closer at the ancient world, to see beyond the temples and the tombs, and to recognize the quiet, hydraulic foundations upon which everything else was built.